Today at the National Press Club, the Australian of the Year, Rosie Batty. Ms Batty has become a fierce campaigner against family violence, turning her own personal tragedy into a fight for change in the community. She's calling for more resources to provide effective violence prevention programs. Rosie Batty with today's National Press Club address.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's Westpac National Press Club address. I'm Misha Schubert, a Vice President of the National Press Club, and it's my very great honour to welcome you in to chair today's event. To begin this June the 3rd, as the nation marks Mabo Day across the nation, can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country. Today, a very special address by an extraordinary Australian, the Australian of the Year, no less. The issue of violence against women and children is now squarely on the nation's agenda. That's due in no small part to the work of the woman who joins us today, Rosie Batty. Rosie's courage and willingness to share her own personal story in the media has given new prominence to this issue and shone an even greater spotlight on the number of women and children in our community living in fear of such violence. Indeed, Rosie calls it an epidemic. Today at the National Press Club we are honoured to host this address at which Rosie will ask the nation to make faster progress on measures that can help to shift the attitudes that give rise to such violence. She'll also launch a new journalism award, the Our Watch Awards for exemplary reporting to end violence against women, which is to be administered by the Walkley Foundation. To speak on her story and on stopping violence before it happens, would you please make her very welcome, the Australian of the Year, Rosie Batty.
Thank you. I wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today. I pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, as well as elders from other communities who may be here today or watching. It is also great to see Megan, Jane, Anne and Michael here today to support me, to support us, to support victims of family violence. Thank you for coming. I also pay tribute to those of you in the audience today who have worked long and hard to protect women and children from violence, who support victims and survivors and advocate for greater funding and action to address this critical issue. Funding continues to be a very strong issue and one I'm passionate about. And I understand just recently there's been a call for means testing of women through community legal centres before they can receive assistance. So what I want to share with you is my story. You all know it. And just over a year ago, Luke was murdered by an estranged partner, my estranged partner, Luke's father, Greg. The day Luke was murdered, I crashed in my bedroom and I woke to hear my friends, neighbours and everyone who was congregated in my home discussing what to do with the media who were congregating outside. They wanted to protect me. They wanted to make decisions on my behalf. But I've always been very independent, and you might be right in assuming that I didn't like them taking things into their hands on my behalf. When I initially walked out of my gate into the road to address the media, I was initially going to tell you very nicely to please leave me alone and to go away, because that's what I understood you did. You know, that's what you did. But soon I was encouraged to just make a comment. I had no rehearsed script. I didn't know what I was doing or saying. I was in shock. I was in disbelief. I was at a very raw point. So what came out of my mouth, I didn't realise was going to be unique. It was going to change things for me, for victims of family violence, At the time, I didn't think there was anything unusual about speaking. I just was hoping that I hadn't embarrassed myself or embarrassed my friends and family. But very soon it became apparent, and feedback came to me, that journalists who were there on that day had been around for a long time, had never actually experienced this kind of response from a victim so soon after a tragedy. And they were in awe, and they were in grief, sharing grief with me in that very, very raw moment. Everyone actually expected me to be the crying victim, the blaming victim. And in this respect, I compare my journey frequently to another woman called Lindy Chamberlain. I'm really grateful that my journey turned out differently to Lindy's. She too was outspoken from the very beginning when she lost her baby and it was taken by a dingo. We didn't believe her. It was too incredulous. She ended up going to jail. She went to jail because of how she was portrayed and how she wasn't believed. A classic example of victim blaming, the very nature of which still exists in our society today, both in our society and within the media. But something I am so pleased to say I haven't directly experienced. I see the comments. Sorry, I've stopped looking at the comments that are generated from ugly, ugly members of our society. And I know that you see those comments too when you write articles in support of victims. But I'm immune to that because who I trust, who I can relate to, who I speak to, that's not the true perspective of what we believe and what we know to be true. I think because I was so open with journalists, and it wasn't contrived, I am an open and honest person. Because I was open and honest and trusting, I trust that you would do the right thing. You didn't have to fill gaps in my story. It developed a mutual platform of respect, and that was established right at the very beginning. This respect has made a huge difference on my journey. It's been huge for me because I have seen the difference it has started to make and the power, the positive power for change that you are capable of generating. I could not do this without you, and I would not be here without you. You see, now the media see family violence as a topic worth reporting on. Now it's newsworthy, but it wasn't always the case. We've been living with an epidemic for a very long time, forever. But people didn't know the statistics. People didn't know how prevalent it was prevalence because people just kept it in their sordid backyards without discussing it, and no one was interested. No one was interested in hearing about our victims' stories. But thank goodness now things have changed. And what I did find is the barriers that broke down, I had female journalists sharing their stories of family violence with me. Not in great detail, but just enough that I knew it didn't matter what profession or what background you came from as a woman. You were also potentially victims of family violence. And they wanted to support my story. They wanted it to be heard. So since my first encounter with the media on that fateful day, I actually haven't stopped. And I was waiting, to be caught out, to be tripped up. I was waiting for it to all turn against me. Because you see, that's what we're fearful of, that sometime at some point the media will turn on you. Hero 1 minute, digging into sordid details of your past in another. Was that going to happen to me? I was warned off talking. People kept suggesting, don't trust the media. Don't talk to them. Don't do this, don't do that. But I followed my instinct, and my instinct was right. And I'm so pleased that the journalists I have trusted with the intimate details of my life, were sensitive, compassionate, and they wanted to share my story because they wanted to make a difference. So many of you in the newspapers and in the media opportunities on TV have helped give me a platform to raise this issue up in the national agenda. And you have demonstrated your power in helping shift the national conversation. You showed me that we can do this together. If we are brave enough to tell stories like mine and those of far too many women and children in Australia. Many other survivors of violence are in the room today, some of whom whose names you will be familiar with through no fault of their own. I would especially like to acknowledge Anne O'Neill, Rebecca Paulson, Michael Costigan. Thank you for coming today. As the Costigan family say, together we are strong. You in the media aren't just telling my story. You are telling the story of 1 in 6 women in Australia who are affected by intimate partner violence. You are telling the story of children who witness this violence, as over half of these women and children have children in their care when violence occurs. The number of articles devoted to the issue of violence against women currently exceeds anything we have ever seen before. Frontline services, who often felt frustrated by the lack of media attention regarding what was happening behind closed doors, are telling me the same thing. Ken Lay, my colleague on the COAG Advisory Committee and the former Victorian Police Commissioner, Natasha Stott-Despoja, Chair of Our Watch, shared this stage 18 months ago. At the time, Ken said that for many years, violence against women has been one of Australia's filthy little secrets. And Natasha called it a national emergency. In Australia, it is both. 1 in 3 women have encountered some form of violence. 1 in 5 of us has experienced sexual assault. Statistics often wash over us, so let's reframe them. If this room was full of women, at least 50 would have experienced sexual assault. Let's take a look around. If you have 3 sisters or 3 daughters, one of them will encounter violence. If you work with at least 6 women, one of them has experienced violence by a current or former partner. Today, I ask you what we do now that the story of violence against women is finally out of the shadows and into the spotlight. How can we take this opportunity and really explore what is driving this violence and what we can do to stop it before it starts? I'm here today in my role as Our Watch Ambassador to talk about preventing violence and how we can make the most effective use of the media spotlight to bring about real change. Research suggests that news coverage influences both public policy and public opinion on topics such as gender-based violence. A recent study in the US indicated that exposure to news articles endorsing victim-blaming rape myths makes people far more likely to side with a perpetrator and dismiss a woman's claim of sexual assault. We tend to sometimes focus in a sensationalistic way on the details of individual acts of violence without joining the dots to a culture of gender-based violence. Upcoming University of Melbourne research looking at media representations of violence, commissioned with Anne Rose and Our Watch, will tell us more. In a space all too often dominated by unspeakable individual tragedies, I challenge the media to continue to work with us to bring about change. And I want to look ahead to an opportunity to celebrate change. But more on that later. So in my year in the spotlight, what have I seen? I have seen great reporting that has shone a light on this important social issue. My experience with the media has largely been positive, and I give credit where credit is due. Thank you. There is a lot we can do and a lot we should celebrate, but unfortunately it's not all been good. For me, the coronial inquest and the horrifying victim blaming that happened surrounding that really enabled us to see victim blaming for what it was, a misguided and damaging narrative. We have work to do if we are going to tackle the attitudes and beliefs that give rise to this violence. She was drunk. She was wearing headphones. Why didn't she just leave? She must have provoked him. Why didn't she take her children out of a violent situation? These are some of the assertions that blame survivors for the violence inflicted upon them. Jeff Hunt, who murdered his wife Kim and 3 children, Fletcher, Mia and Phoebe, in rural New South Wales last year and then committed suicide himself, was overwhelmingly sympathised with the articles that followed. They emphasised the burden of looking after his wife after a serious brain injury and gave weight to quotes which described him as a nice man who loved his family. Newsflash: nice men who love their family do not control or murder them. I've also seen atrocious headlines that openly disrespect victims. Monster Chef and the She-Male and Bride and Seek spring to mind. This is frustrating for everyone and repulsive to survivors. Challenging ignorant victim blaming like I did, and you may all remember the classic Joe Hildebrand interchange on Studio 10 last year, which, if you remember, made me furious. We need to challenge this on every time. Perpetrators must be held accountable for their actions. Women are not to blame. The other thing I have noticed is that many panels on TV or radio lack family violence experts, and therefore merely produce ill-informed triviality. We learn nothing. Depth of reporting is integral to family violence. Depth of reporting is integral to family violence reporting, which is why I chose Four Corners over shows that just sensationally skim the surface. We want to see something that will make a difference, that we can learn from, not just to create horror. Just think what we can do when we work in collaboration with specialists. We'll attract viewers and readers with informed stories, not just shine lights that dwell on human tragedy and sensationalism to draw in an audience for the purpose of the advertising dollar. If we want to create real change, and I truly believe many in the Australian media and much of the Australian public do, we need to see this sustained in a more informed media commentary. The stories we tell ourselves about ourselves are hugely important. The media have an important role to play in helping shape attitudes, perceptions and knowledge that give rise to a culture of silence or minimisation of violence against women and their children. According to Vic Health's latest attitude survey, a significant proportion of Australians still excuse, trivialise and justify violence against women. A growing number of Australians think that a victim is at least partially to blame for incidents of domestic and family violence. 1 in 6 think that women who say no really mean yes. Attitudes among young people are particularly bad. According to recent research commissioned by Our Watch, 1 in 4 young men believe that controlling and violent behaviours are signs of male strength. 1 in 6 12 to 24-year-olds believe women should know their place. If we want to tackle this violence, to stop it before it starts, we need to tackle these attitudes and beliefs. At the least, please don't reinforce them. The media has a great opportunity to help do this and bring about positive change. A great example of this is Mindframe's work in highlighting how reporting of suicide directly affects the amount of people who commit suicide and how they carry it out. Reporting guidelines and links to Lifeline and Beyond Blue are now widely used to great effect. We must do more to help women and their children currently in crisis. According to Vic Health, 1/3 of women in the general community don't know where to go for outside help to support someone suffering domestic violence. This directly correlates to the lack of information about appropriate services published in articles about family violence. Only 8% of articles mentioning domestic violence have included reference to 1-800-RESPECT since the start of the year. According to the media monitoring platform Meltwater. So I challenge every single media outlet to include links to services such as 1-800-RESPECT so that women really know where to get help. This is critical. This is a standard that we should be always in our TV programs, no matter what program it is, it should be in the newspapers. We should have this number so people who may know someone in crisis or in crisis themselves, it's a duty that we have for their well-being and care. 8% is poor. It is unacceptable. It should be in every article if you're mentioning family violence or domestic violence in any context. With small changes such as these, the media has the power to help many women and their children get much needed support and assistance, and to ensure that their stories aren't lost. We can work to change the culture that has seen, according to media reports, 39 women murdered in 2015 alone. Currently, it's reaching 2 women a week. So Australia is full of wonderful journalists, many of whom I've had the pleasure of working with. In this dark space, we want to shine a light on the positive change happening here and celebrate you and the great work that you do. Overall, improved media reporting can deepen the understanding of what is driving this violence and what it takes to prevent it. And we can prevent it. To recognise and reward some of the fantastic reporting that already exists about violence against women, and to encourage other journalists and media outlets to follow suit. I am very excited to announce the launch of the Our Watch Media Awards, which we are proud to say will be administered by the Walkley Foundation. I would like to acknowledge Jackie Park, the CEO of the Walkley Foundation, who is here in the audience today. The inaugural awards are made possible with the generous support and funding from the federal government. The awards will build on the approach and success of Domestic Violence Victoria's Victorian-based Ending Violence Against Women Awards, which are widely considered to have had a significant impact on transforming media reporting in Victoria. I officially announce the Our Watch Media Awards open for nominations. More information about the award categories can be found on the Walkley Foundation website, and winners will be announced in September this year. I ask you, the Australian media, to join me in preventing violence against women and their children. And I invite you, the Australian public watching, to continue to join in the national conversation we started just over a year ago. Together we can stop it before it starts. I look forward to celebrating excellence and change in September. Thank you.
What an extraordinary address. Thank you, Rosie. We begin today the period of questions and answers, and I might take the prerogative as the chairperson of asking, what would you like to see the nation's political leaders do as the urgent next steps in shaping public policy around the issues that you've highlighted today?
Am I supposed to be standing up or sitting down?
Standing up.
Thank you. Just got to get the protocol right. Sorry, Misha. Can you ask me the question again?
What action as the urgent next steps would you like to see from policymakers about making progress on some of the issues you've outlined today?
We really need to just really make sure that this subject, this epidemic is really continue to be pushed very, very seriously. We need to really treat this with a matter of urgency and not let it slide off the radar. I'm committed, while I'm Australian of the Year, clearly to do as much as I can, but I can only do so much. It's to us all to really do what we can in our circle of influence to enforce change.
Our next question is from Tori Shepherd of the Adelaide Advertiser.
Hi, Tori Shepherd from the Advertiser. Like everyone here, I'm a big admirer. How would you rate the Minister for Women's work so far on domestic violence?
I think we are seeing a well-intended Minister for Women, but we're not seeing strong leadership, and we're seeing conflict in decisions that are made, giving voice to support for victims of violence, but on the other hand, lack of funding and making cuts to essential frontline services. Again, the recent concern that's been brought to my attention is looking at means testing for women, again seeking legal advice through community legal centres. So what we need to see strong leadership, we need to see investment, long-term strategies, bipartisan approaches. This is not going away. We have to clearly put some substantial funding into this issue. You know, amazingly, the response is when we describe terrorism and there's any slight threat of terrorism, the amazing responses we see. So, let's start calling it family terrorism, and perhaps we start to see that investment of funding being applied where it needs to be.
Our next question is from Rosie Lewis of The Australian.
Rosie Lewis from The Australian. Thanks for your speech. Following on from those two questions, I guess the simple question for you is, do you believe the government does have its priorities right? As you say, we hear a lot about this national awareness campaign, we hear a lot about the national DVO scheme, but then we've got this ad hoc funding. If it was up to you, are these priorities right?
Look, I think it's really important that, certainly some of these proposals are really important, and what we are seeing, as national strategies are key and important initiatives, and they certainly play a part. I don't think it's, this isn't just the government's issue, is it? We look for the government to fix things, give us money and solve our issues. But this is something for us all to take responsibility for. You as the media have a huge degree of responsibility and influence. Your awareness and shifting of community attitudes, you have so much influence, so much influence. That's why when we get it wrong, it's a really negative step back. So we need to really look at what is the issue of family violence. It is gender-based. Do we really understand the myths? Are we really informed as journalists about this issue? So I would, really challenge you to take responsibility for the part that you can play in your own sector, in your own profession, because, you know, again, looking at government to fix things and increase funding. I think what I really would like to see is increased, you know, respect and an understanding for the work that the frontline services do. You know, people who are managing refugees, responding to women in crisis, looking at accommodation and housing. Women, you know, there were support lines that are looking at talking to women and trying to understand their safety risks. You know, we really have to respect and support and invest in these organisations. Prevention is really important. It is a strategy that we have to be part of. We have to have education in our schools. We have to have, you know, shifting of community attitudes in our sporting organisations. These are really key. But we have to have the ability to support the victims who are having to leave highly violent and dangerous situations. When they pick up the phone, someone must answer it. We must have some way of supporting the journey of a current victim, because quite now it is a disaster. It is a disaster, and one that we should be really quite ashamed of. So we have to look at those internal processes and systems and organisations, and we all individually, whether you're a lawyer or a magistrate or a judge, take responsibility for learning about this issue, understanding the complexities of violence, so that we're not systemically creating further abuse to innocent victims.
Laura Jays of Sky News has our next question.
Laura Jays, Sky News. Rosie, thank you so much. I know it's difficult to put a dollar figure on it, but can you give us a sense of the funding that is needed, the extra funding, and also on more specifics? You'd know about shock incarceration, and in the United States they have specialised domestic violence courts. It is expensive, but is that something that we, as the media and you, will be pushing the government to look at?
Look, I'm hopeless with budgets. I couldn't, you know, $1 million seems like a lot of money to me, but clearly it's a drop in the ocean. So you're talking of, you know, how amazing it is for governments to find money to counter terrorism, and when there's no money available to help people who are vulnerable and, you know, needing that kind of frontline support. So I think that there is definitely a place for better specialisation. Certainly the specialisation of family violence courts is great, but at the very least we need our magistrates and judges to be very informed about this issue, rather than making the same kind of incorrect assumptions and judgments and putting the risk and minimising risk and not recognising red flags and continuing to make decisions through our courts, putting children in danger. Again, various parts of our judicial system cannot be reported on by the media. The victims' voices cannot be portrayed through the media. There is a hell of a lot of change that needs to happen in that space that the media is not allowed to report on, and we all know how many victim stories need to be heard and are silenced because of that. So, you know, one of my agendas is really to look at how we can change the journey through the family law court system and to have better outcomes for vulnerable children and women going through that process. So, you know, how much it is very important that we have a strong response for perpetrators, that we have a view and look at, because there is very little investment in this space. We just want the violence to stop. But how are we working on that stopping when we respond to perpetrators right now? So it is, you know, something that we have to put a lot of investment into that is currently kind of lacking.
The next question is from Virginia Hausiger of the ABC.
Thanks, Misha. Thanks, Rosie, for your terrific speech. It's great to have you here in Canberra. I'm from the ABC here in Canberra, and I want to bring you back to the issue of reporting and the media coverage of violence against women. It's wonderful to hear about the Our Watch prize for reporting. That's a terrific initiative. But as you know, it's very hard for the media to cover this issue. I just want to first raise or make you aware of a terrific initiative that was run by the ACT government here. In fact, in this very room over a year ago, we had a wonderful get-together of business people and those working in the violence against women frontline services, and we called it Partners in Prevention. And we discussed ways that businesses, local businesses, communities, organisations can work together in the workplace, and it was terrific, but it got no media coverage. Here in the ACT, we at the ABC, we have run a number of terrific stories about the work that's been done by the service providers here, by the Canberra Rape Crisis Centre that is represented here today. But again, the stories that don't include that graphic detail, the very thing you said was getting a lot of play on television panels and trivialises the issue. If we don't use that, it doesn't get broad coverage. So coming back to that point about not wanting to trivialise, but it's time to improve the level of discussion in the media about this issue. What do you think we should be focusing on if we want to move away from just the terrible stories, the heartbreaking stories?
Well, I think it's doing some, I'm not a journalist, but I think it's doing kind of more research and more depth of coverage so that you're actually not just portraying it as an incident, a one-off incident, you know, glorifying the sinister nature of what's happened, but actually, you know, trying to understand the dynamics and the complexities and actually learning, you know, so that your reader learns something from this that reinforces an improved understanding of the situation. So, you have great resources through Our Watch about statistics and you know, it's really making sure that when you do your research, you're going to the right places to have your, to have the kind of, I guess, depth that you need through, you know, the eyes of people who add that layer of specialisation. So I think it gives more credibility as well. So I think it's you know, using your contacts. I mean, quite often clearly people quite often want a comment from myself, but I have, you know, I know better in New South Wales, in Queensland. In Victoria, where I would say, please talk to Fiona McCormack from Domestic Violence Victoria. I would say, you know, in New South Wales, please talk to Moo from Domestic Violence New South Wales. Please talk to the specialised services in your state who can make sure that you are reporting sensitively, that actually have, you know, inside information about some of the problems they may be having with their lobbying, with their funding, with their challenges. You know, go to the source that is credible, informed, and where you will learn and to improve on your understanding of this. Because, you know, we can't continue as a society carrying on like this. Something has to give, and something is giving hugely. We can't afford more. We can't even afford any woman or child to be killed like Luke was. But we cannot bloody afford it to go any higher. And what's going to happen as we raise awareness, as we become better about highlighting this issue, women will have the strength and understanding to leave. Then what are we going to do with them when they've left, if we have no services to support them? If we're not looking at ways that, instead of placing the onus of safety onto the responsibility of the victim, which is what we currently do, you know, what's the solution? I'll take out an intervention order, you know, go into a refuge, change your identity, flee interstate or overseas. We're asking the women and the children to give up what is clearly important to all of us, which is connections into society, connections into our community, connections with our families. Meanwhile, the perpetrator, who may be in any profession, can be using the court to basically ruin his ex-partner through the court system by making her penniless, homeless. We can see the perpetrator still having a beer with his mates, being considered a regular bloke around the community, and we're continuing to blame the woman for putting up with it in the first place or not leaving when we feel she should. So, you know, you play an enormous part in this, either because of your own perceptions and how you somehow support this ignorance and these misconceptions, But we need to challenge each other, by realising we're not experts in this. It's completely understandable. But what we really need to be able to do is become informed about this as the biggest social issue that we have. And why is it we've only just started to talk about it? But now that we have a lot of opportunity to learn more and call out perpetrator behaviour, call out the sexist, stereotypical, gender-based, commentaries. So, we have those responsibilities and they will make a difference. We're all morally obliged for the sake of our children. And the recent survey results tell us our young people are completely misguided. That is terrible, to think that your young daughter or your young son, through influences maybe outside of their family, have, views of violence that make them feel masculine because it's okay to be violent and controlling because it's a sign of strength, or that it's okay for your daughter to accept controlling or derogatory behaviour or the occasional slap because he's drunk and he apologised. Where are our values around this? Because what we do need to do is really challenge them so our young people are clearly growing up, understanding what is clearly right and wrong, with no grey areas in between.
The next question today is from Mark Kenny from Fairfax.
Mark Kenny, Rosie from The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, and thank you for that last answer. I don't believe I've heard a more cogent explanation of the problem than that, so that was very, very telling, I think. Can I just go to some of the issues that you raised there, or a sort of a foundational issue that you raised there, which is really, and you mentioned this in your speech when you said that this is gender-based, this problem, and I assume by that you mean this is sort of rooted in the politics of gender. Is there a fundamental cultural problem in Australia with this that needs to be addressed and talked about? And I guess an even pricklier question, with some of the cultures that we import to this country, with our proud multicultural record, are we also importing even more backward thinking gender politics in some of these cultures, and does that need to be addressed as well?
Look, I think that, certainly some of the communities that come into Australia have significant issues within their own CALD communities. We've got significant issues within our Aboriginal communities where a woman is at risk of 40 times, I think it's 45 times more at risk of violence than we are, which is horrific. However, it is absolutely a stereotypical Australian male. Absolutely. There's nowhere to hide. It is absolutely. As men and as women, we are born with our views of life. From the moment that we breathe, you have your male sense of privilege and entitlement that you view through your lens. You don't know any different. As a woman, we know our place. When I grew up on a farm. I was the oldest and I had 3 brothers. It was made very clear to me from the beginning. I would find a husband and go. It wasn't that important that I had to get to university. And that was the limit of my expectation. But my brothers, they would go to agricultural college, they would inherit the farm, they would have a place to live provided by the farm and a career for the rest of their lives. So they grew up with that privilege of entitlement, knowing no different. I grew up with my 2 aunties being very bitter about my father inheriting all of this and thought, you know what, that's just the way of the world. That's just the way it is. I am not going to grow up bitter. So I never got the rich husband. But in actual fact, over that period of time, my dad did divide up his farm, and he actually has given us all equal share. So something shifted. But what we're looking at is the acceptance and understanding that, where women have come through generations and where men are having to, try to work out some better gender-based levels in their political parties, senior levels. I think we know which ones I'm referring to. But, and certainly within the media, very top-heavy with all men. So it's not just a box-ticking exercise, it's an important reality that we need both perspectives to be brought to any area of decision-making, because we complement each other, and we cannot clearly have the right view with just one gender making that decision. So it is about mutual respect, mutually engaging together to understand the different perspectives we bring. And, men aren't losing anything. We're gaining. And so it is a gender issue, and we want to excuse violence. We want to excuse it. We want to blame drug and alcohol. We want to say it's the ice epidemic. We want to believe that. We want to believe it's mental illness or anything. But no. Those issues exacerbate violence. They inflame a situation. They certainly don't help. But they are not the cause. The cause is this is a gender issue. It's not, when you look at the TV, I now notice every bit of violence that's on there is young men killing young men, beating him up, the one-punch campaign, whatever. It's men hurting other men. It's men in wars. All we're seeing is violence, mainly masculine, male. And yes, everyone will say, somebody will be thinking it right now, but what about the men? Women are violent too. You know what? It's 2 women a week that are being murdered. It is 2 women a week. The statistics are very clear. Police business is also very clear. You can ask any police commissioner the stats of the police business, and they will say to you, I think it's like 40% of police business is to family violence incidents, and they are predominantly, the majority, men harming women and children. So I think it's very uncomfortable, and you kind of feel the energy in the room as soon as you start to make it a gender issue, and people kind of, this is a bit of a tough subject. But we really have to start putting it out there and saying, no one's to blame about this. It's about looking at the view of the world as you see it, and being challenged about how different it is for someone in the other sex. Because I do know that most men in this room who have daughters will want completely the same opportunities for their daughters without having to work harder or, having to accept less pay. We want completely to have equal opportunities for our daughters, and we certainly don't want them to be in danger or exposed to violence. But of course, the statistics state that it's highly likely that at some point your daughter will be affected in some way by violence, because that's what we live with. So, I appreciate that opportunity to tackle it and name it. And I do think it is really hard, even for women too, to name it and to see it. And it influences all our thinking. But I think it's the power of what you have the opportunity to do is by challenging it, by reading informed views from places and resources like Our Watch, the Men's No to Violence group, having men who are in this sector, working with men, go and spend some time with them, ask them to comment, use them as a resource to always get a perspective. You'll find them fascinating. Good men. It's not that we're saying all men are bad. Clearly they're not. I've got a wonderful father and 3 great brothers, and I had a beautiful son.
The Saturday paper's Sophie Morris has today's next question.
Rosie, Sophie Morris from the Saturday paper. Thank you very much for your speech today. And I want to thank you too for putting your trust in reporters in the past year. Contrary to our trade's reputation, most of us want to report with compassion and integrity, so I'm really glad that's been your experience. You've given us one very practical tip today for reporting on domestic violence, on family violence. You've said all reports should embed this number, 1-800-RESPECT. You also said when someone makes that call, there must be someone there to answer the phone. I wonder if there's a woman who's watching at home today and is recognising that she might need help. If she picks up that phone and makes that phone call, can you just tell us what she will encounter? What sort of support will she find? What sort of support do you hope she would find?
Well, I'm really pleased because the federal government did inject further funding into the 1-800-RESPECT line, because I think they missed like 18,000 calls last year because the demand just couldn't, was too extreme. So the reason I always say, when people say to me all the time, what do I do for my friend? What do I do for my daughter, my granddaughter? What do I do with my neighbour? Someone I know is experiencing violence. What do I say? I think, well, you know what? Sometimes your ill-intended advice is painful. It's better sometimes to just say, are you okay? Are you okay? And to just offer that support. But what I would say is the reason I commend and suggest everyone knows about the 1-800-RESPECT is, one, it's very simple to remember. You don't have to be an expert in your own neighbourhood to find out all the resources and services. You just have to know it's 1-800-RESPECT. When you call, you are counselled by people who have the expertise to understand your situation. You have the expertise to listen to your story, to understand what is happening in your life. If you are in a crisis situation, you will be transferred to a crisis line where they will assist your immediate risk and take you to safety. If you are looking for counselling because you're not quite sure what you want to do, how you feel, sometimes people aren't even sure if they're in a violent relationship. So again, that means that they can be heard, their experiences can be understood, be validated without blame or judgment or criticism. It's very empowering when you are opening up for the first time to know that somebody is going to not blame you, to actually hear you. So the 1-800 line is a starting point, and you will be linked into a service in your local area without you having to find out where they are or where to go. The other great tool is the DAISY app, which was also launched by the 1-800-RESPECT line. So the DAISY app is obviously on your phone, where you can link into services in your area that specialise in family violence. The reason it is important to link into a specialised family violence service rather than some melting pot of multi-service stuff that was kind of being shoved down is because not everyone recognises your level of risk, the red flags. You need to be linked into a specialised service who hopefully can advocate for you, to the police, help you through, understand the court process, perhaps take you into court or introduce you to legal supports. So let's keep it simple for everybody. Let's keep it really simple. If all we have to remember is the 1-800 line, it should be up on any TV program. And I know recently I watched, and we were all very disappointed, there was a major cover of family violence on a major TV program, and they decided not to take the suggestions of having the 1-800-RESPECT line on display. So the reason we say that is some people will be triggered. Some people will be triggered by what you perhaps see as some kind of sensationalised story. But we're talking about someone experiencing this in their life, watching TV. And I can tell you right now, a lot of perpetrators are saying, you don't think you're going to get any ideas about this. Because that's exactly what they're saying. Don't you think you're going to get any ideas about leaving? So as we continue to raise the profile of family violence and how wrong and prevalent it does place pressure and risk safety of victims who are currently in unsafe situations. So we have an obligation right now to put pressure on our governments to prioritise the response and safety of our victims, as well as doing the prevention work that is so important to influence our younger generations. By you reporting on these issues, by you doing your investigation and challenging the government about what you're finding out in local country areas who are in crisis, by you raising this to into a topic of conversation, gee whiz, it has enormous power. I found that firsthand. Amazing how sometimes governments have absolutely no money, and then some headline that is really embarrassing and confronting a huge shift. So I engage with, please, let's work together. We can achieve huge things. Thank you.
We are heading towards the end of our broadcast slot, but we do have time for a couple more last questions. Our next questioner is David Spears from Sky.
Rosie, thank you very much for the speech today. Amazing, and particularly the messages, not just for our political leaders, but for us in the media as well. One thing you said that I just want to pick up on, you were talking about some of the difficulties the media has in reporting some family violence situations because of restrictions around the family court and what can and can't be reported. You said a hell of a lot of change needs to happen. What change? What would be your ideal around what can and can't be reported? Who should decide what can and can't be reported?
Well, I think, again, I'm not an expert in this space. And I've certainly learnt a lot through, my journey as a victim and the enormous number of victims who try to make contact with me, either via sending me letters, emails, Facebook, to a point where I can't cope with the volume. So I have a great organisation called Safe Steps in Victoria who are managing that for me, because they're the Women's Crisis Response Service who are trained to respond to victims. So what I would say to you is nearly all of them are going through some very difficult journeys through the family law court, who are continued to, perhaps their journey of violence is not regarded when decisions are made about the children, and where we continue to see children at risk because of the violence between two parties, and how the best interest of the child is still seen to be, at any cost, they must have access to both parents. So there's a lot of looking, we need to really look at that very, very closely, and we need to understand where these decisions are being made from, why, what literature was it that we were originally kind of reading and understanding, because things have changed. We do know more. Trauma around family violence is permanently damaging for children. For children to be forced to continue to see a perpetrator after he's either killed their mother or seriously injured her, for the child to be forced to continue to see the father on access visits is very difficult to understand. So, I would invite the media to work out ways of how stories that come to you through the family law courts can be potentially portrayed, investigated and researched, because there's a lot of stories that can't be told that perhaps if we were able to tell them in some way, we would have significant change happening in that space.
The next question is from Ron Aggs from Fairfax.
Thank you. Congratulations, Rosie.
Thanks, Ron.
I'm reporting for Fairfax for a couple of New South Wales regional papers, and I hope I don't fit a male gender stereotype. My parents brought me up to respect all people who deserve my respect, regardless of gender. My question is there a danger that we're only looking at part, albeit a major part, of the overall problem? And broader than today, should we begin to solve the whole problem, should we discuss equally violence by women against men, parent against child, child against parent, and within same-sex relationships? Shouldn't we all be trying to address and report all violence within family relationships?
Look, and I think, family violence obviously certainly are all dynamics. Clearly my journey is one of experiencing partner violence, and my passion is clearly in that space. That is where I can speak as an expert, because that is where I have my expertise. Absolutely, there is very, very, difficult for same-sex relationships, children, elders. However, when we're looking at the same approach for prevention, it also has the same effects of if we're looking at it as a prevention space, it also helps the other areas of the family in those dynamics as well. So it's not, one. Violence is about power and control. It's not about anger management. It's about power and control. And, there will always be the point that is raised either by a man or a woman, but what about violent women? And I think, it's certainly something that we all know. There's, when you do report, you will get a lot of people clearly needing to express that there is violent women too, and we do understand that, obviously. But the degree of terror that a woman, that a man exerts over his family is profoundly different. So a woman is violent, but they're not living, I don't know how many men will be living in total fear of their lives without any capacity to make any decisions. So I think what we need to really, and the reason I speak about this, and I think that the reason is this is the main issue, is because it's 2 women a week being murdered. We have to come back to statistics. And when we also look then at statistics of, go to the police, ask them about their day-to-day activities, ask them about the job that they're doing. And they will tell you that police are called out, and the majority of their business is in response to a woman being injured by a male partner. So I think the statistics speak for themselves. I think we need to be mindful and somehow look at not escaping that this is a gender issue, but respecting too that there are other people who feel isolated and feel unheard because they aren't in the majority, and that is men who are in a violent situation and feeling unheard. So I'm not quite sure whether that answers the question, but I talk because this is my space, and I do feel that if we're looking at violence as a whole and it coming from a power and control perspective, it will also have benefit to those other areas of family violence too.
We are over time, but we're going to make time for one very quick last question from Lucy Flood from Canberra Girls Grammar.
Hello, I'm Lucy from Canberra Girls Grammar. Thank you so much for allowing us to come here and listen to you today. You talked a lot about youth. So a lot of people in this room have sons and daughters.
Yes.
What would be the main message you would give to young men and women to ensure that they don't become the perpetrators and victims of the future?
I think, and thank you, it's really great to see a young person and asking questions because, violence is never okay. It is never okay. You don't deserve it, you don't cause it, and it's always a behaviour that is a choice. So there are never any allowances, never any violence is always a choice, and it's always wrong. And I think that having respect, and there is an app for young girls called I Matter, and it does, demonstrate healthy relationships and what to do or how to look at, is your relationship healthy or is it damaging? So I think that, talk to mum and dad, and if you don't have great relations because of your family environment, I bet there's somebody that you can trust, one of the people at school that you respect as a role model to talk about, because I believe the school environments are critical, really critical in helping young people better understand what respectful relationships are. We need to start that education from kinder upwards. Thank you.